April 11th, in history. In 1512, Italy was a battlefield. French forces led by the dazzling 23-year-old Gaston de Foix marched on Ravenna to break the Holy League's grip. On April 11th, French cannons shattered the League's lines. After hours of brutal fighting, the Spanish and Papal army broke, a decisive, devastating French victory. France won the field but lost its finest general. Gaston de Foix fell in pursuit, and without him, the victory crumbled. France would soon abandon northern Italy entirely. In 1689, England stood at a crossroads. The Glorious Revolution had just ousted King James II, and Protestant power was ascending across the British Isles. On April 11th, William of Orange and Mary II were crowned joint monarchs at Westminster Abbey, the first co-equal rulers granted power explicitly by Act of Parliament. Their coronation cemented constitutional monarchy in Britain, curbing royal power forever and inspiring democratic movements across the world for centuries to come. In 1713, Europe lay exhausted after a decade of brutal war. Nations had clashed over who would rule Spain's vast empire, draining treasuries and devastating populations. On April 11, 1713, diplomats gathered in Utrecht to sign a landmark peace. Britain won Gibraltar, Minorca, and the lucrative Asiento, the exclusive right to supply enslaved Africans to Spanish colonies. Utrecht redrew the world map. Britain emerged as a rising maritime power. The balance of power principle took root in European diplomacy, and millions of enslaved Africans would suffer under the Asiento's terms for decades. In 1814, Napoleon Bonaparte's empire was crumbling. Coalition armies had swept into Paris, and the once unstoppable emperor faced total collapse. On April 11th, Napoleon signed the Treaty of Fontainebleau, an unconditional abdication. He renounced his throne and was exiled to the island of Elba. Napoleon's abdication reshaped Europe forever. The Congress of Vienna redrew borders and ushered in a new era of conservative order that defined the continent for generations. In 1865, the Civil War was ending. Days after Lee's surrender at Appomattox, a victorious but weary nation held its breath, awaiting what came next. President Lincoln stood at the White House balcony, outlining Reconstruction and endorsing voting rights for Black Americans, as a dangerous figure watched silently from the crowd below. 3 days later, Lincoln was assassinated. His final speech, a plea for reconciliation and Black suffrage, echoed through a century of unfinished American promises. In 1945, as Allied forces swept through Germany, they approached Weimar, a city of culture hiding an unspeakable secret in the hills above it. On April 11th, soldiers of the 89th Infantry Division breached Buchenwald's gates, finding 21,000 survivors in devastating conditions. Eisenhower ordered the world to witness it firsthand. Buchenwald became undeniable proof of Nazi atrocity. Its liberation shaped international law, Holocaust remembrance, and the founding of human rights institutions still standing today. In 1951, the Korean War raged as General Douglas MacArthur commanded Allied forces. President Truman sought a limited war. MacArthur wanted total victory. Defying direct orders, MacArthur publicly urged war with China. Truman, asserting civilian authority, fired the celebrated general on April 11th. MacArthur returned home to massive parades, but the principle held: civilians command the military. The firing defined American democratic governance forever. In 1961, Jerusalem braced for history. Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi SS officer and key architect of the Holocaust's logistics, had been captured in Argentina by Mossad agents and brought to stand trial. On April 11th, the trial opened before the world. Eichmann sat in a glass booth as survivors testified. The proceedings were televised globally, the first time millions confronted the Holocaust's full scale. Eichmann was executed in 1962. The trial reshaped Holocaust memory worldwide and inspired Hannah Arendt's concept of the banality of evil, a warning about ordinary people enabling atrocity. In 1965, a quiet Palm Sunday afternoon across the American Midwest turned ominous. Dark skies gathered over Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan as families returned from church. 47 tornadoes tore through 5 states in hours. Towns were leveled in seconds. 256 people perished, thousands injured, with almost no warning to escape. The outbreak shocked the nation into action. It directly transformed tornado warning systems, giving millions earlier alerts that save lives to this day. In 1968, America was fractured. Just days after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, cities burned and grief gripped the nation. On April 11, President Johnson signed the Fair Housing Act, banning discrimination in housing sales and rentals across the entire country. The act transformed American neighborhoods forever, opening doors long closed by prejudice and laying the foundation for housing equality. In 1970, NASA launched Apollo 13 from Kennedy Space Center, the third mission destined for the moon, carrying 3 astronauts into the unknown. 2 days in, an oxygen tank exploded, crippling the service module. The crew abandoned it and used the lunar module as an emergency lifeboat to survive. Against all odds, the crew splashed down safely. Apollo 13 became a defining symbol of human ingenuity and teamwork under impossible pressure. In 1994, Rwanda descended into chaos. Following the assassination of President Habyarimana, ethnic violence erupted across the country as UN peacekeepers stood watch. On April 11, Belgium withdrew its 400 peacekeepers after 10 soldiers were killed. The UN force, already undermanned, lost its backbone, leaving civilians with no protection. Over 800,000 people were killed in 100 days. The withdrawal became a symbol of international failure, reshaping how the world debates intervention and the duty to protect. In 2019, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange had spent nearly 7 years living inside Ecuador's London embassy, avoiding extradition. Ecuador revoked his asylum. British officers entered the embassy and carried Assange out, ending his years of refuge in a dramatic arrest. His arrest ignited a global debate on press freedom and whistleblowing, with the US seeking extradition on espionage charges that many see as a threat to journalism.